In this class, we're going to talk briefly about the market and how it works. We have many more classes on a similar theme that you will meet later in the course. But for the moment, let's just deal with this one. Now, a market is any arrangement which brings buyers and sellers of a particular product together. So it's an arrangement. It doesn't have to be in a particular place, a particular location. It doesn't have to have face-to-face contact. It's anything which facilitates buying and selling. And that really is what we can see the market to be. It's something that facilitates buying and selling. It's a place, it's an organization, it's an arrangement. We can use lots of words to describe it. But the outcome is that the ownership of a product passes from one to another. And the market has facilitated that. We'll see how it works as we work our way through the course. There are two sides in the market. There's demand and supply, and those were given to us by Alfred Marshall a long time ago. We'll have more to say about Marshall as we go through the course. But for the moment, let's look at demand. It's a movement along the demand curve versus a shift of the curve. There are two ways of looking at demand. And I should say right at the outset, when we talk about demand, we're talking about at a moment in time or over some time period. We must specify the time period. In fact, that's a good way of looking at it. Think of it as a time period. Think of it as a week or a day or something of that nature. It is related to time. So if I said to you my demand for a particular type of sweets was 20 sweets, it doesn't tell you anything. Do I have 20 sweets an hour, 20 sweets a week, 20 sweets a year? So I must specify a time period. And when we talk about demand, we always have to say our demand per unit of time, per day, per week, per year, whatever it is. We call it a flow concept, by the way. When we talk about time, we call it a flow concept. Now some people would say it's a very daunting picture of demand. Well, this is the way economists would represent it. Let's just look at the diagram for a moment. We'll be meeting this many times over, so don't get worried if it looks intimidating at the moment. We'll be doing it again and again, and you will become used to it. On the vertical axis here, we have the price per unit. Well, that makes sense. If I said the price of petrol was £2 or $2 or whatever your currency is, it doesn't tell you anything. Again, is it £2 or $2 or two whatever per litre, per gallon, per bucket? We don't know. We have to specify a unit. Until we specify a unit, it doesn't make much sense. And likewise, the quantity is per unit of time. Like I said earlier, if I said my demand for something was 25, is it 25 of those things per week or per day, per hour, per year? It makes a big difference. So we must specify a time period and we must specify per unit. Now on this curve, I've got two demand curves. And all the demand curve does is represents the amount of sales or demands for different prices. So at the price P1, this is demanded. At P2, we have Q2 is demanded. We're moving along the DD curve. But the DD curve may shift, and we'll see how that happens as well in several classes coming up. It's an important topic. So it may shift for various reasons. Let's say it shifted outwards. Then at the price P2, the demand originally was Q2. Maybe now people want more of it. It's become more fashionable perhaps. So at the same price, more people want it. It's more fashionable. That could be an explanation. We'll talk about this in much more detail and explain the reasons why demand curves can shift and they don't shift, and we'll move them along the curve and so on. We'll do that in other classes. Today I'm just introducing this concept. So A leftward shift of the curve. Well, this can be caused for various reasons. For example, a fall in income. If we have less income, then we can't demand as much. It could be an increase in income if the good is inferior. Inferior goods have an inverse relationship with changes in income. As our income goes up, we buy less of it. It's an inferior good. And we'll have dealt with that earlier on when we look at demand, when we introduce demand. But for the moment, if you're not familiar with inferior goods, just go back, look that one up, and keep it in your notes. And we will have classes on it. You should have perhaps encountered a couple before you got this far, but go back and check. It could be that a demand curve will shift its position if there's a fall in the price of one of the substitute goods. Sometimes goods have a substitute. So let's say the price of diesel oil, diesel substitute for petrol. I'm not too sure what it's called, diesel oil, or let's say that let's say it falls in price. That means diesel cars will be more attractive. That means less petrol cars will be sold, and therefore less petrol will be sold. So the demand curve has shifted because of that. In economics, we have to get used to chaining different points together to get the outcome. So often we have to look to see what the cause is, and we may have several reasons why and exceptions to it. We just cope with that. That's the way life is. The market supply, well, here's, let's say we have firm A and firm B, and let's say the price in the market is P1, so many dollars, so many pounds, so many euros, whatever it is. For firm A, the amount supplied is QA, and at the same price for B, it's QB. So for the industry, for the two of them together, it'll be A plus B. Simple. We just add it horizontally. We add the two curves horizontally and get the total. Now, the supply curve has a positive relationship with price. In other words, it's upward sloping. The determinants of the market supply, well, the price of the good clearly determines its supply. The price of related goods. So if the price of petrol rises, the demand for cars will fall. The supply of cars may fall as well. So markets are not distinct, they are connected. Our incomes will determine how much we demand and how much is supplied also. If our incomes are falling, producers will find it difficult to supply the same amount to the market as before the income fell. They'll find it difficult to sell that amount. So as incomes change, the supply may change. Technology, of course, can change the amount supplied. We should be familiar with this. As technology improves, it becomes easier to supply goods onto the market. Machines become specialized. It's easier for producers to distribute their goods, and so technology will determine the supply of goods on the market as well. Sometimes the goals of the company, well, some companies want to get big, some companies don't. Some companies want to remain small. So the ones who want to remain small may not want to increase the supply or change the supply. They're happy with what they've got. So the goal or the objective of the firm will determine the supply. Tax. If the government increases a tax on a good, then less of it will be supplied. Less of it will be purchased, less will be supplied. There are other influences on production and output. For example, the weather could be one. If you're dealing with agricultural produce, the weather could be a major determinant of the supply of that good. If the weather is very bad, less of the good will be supplied. So there are many factors that contribute to it. Let's look at the supply curve. First of all, movements along the supply curve versus a shift of the curve. So there's the supply curve, and let's say the price is P1 and the quantity supplied is Q2. Now let's say the price falls from P1 to P2 and the quantity falls as well. As the price falls, less is supplied. And as I said earlier, supply depends on many factors. The price of the good, the consumer's income. The consumers can't afford it. It doesn't matter what the price is. If they can't afford it, they're not going to purchase it. It could be health and safety concerns. The government may say that this item, this product is dangerous. There may be fashion issues about the product. Perhaps some singer is now wearing a certain fashion, and that may lead to an increase in the demand for that fashion amongst the general public. We have to say, well, is it a necessary good? What about the weather, as I said, in the case of agriculture? And I say other here, number 7, because there are many other points. I just cut it off at 6. But you can, in the literature, when you're reading it, you may fall across others. What I really want to do here, I'm going to put the cursor onto the screen. What I'm really going to do here is introduce this notation down here, which we will use right throughout the study of economics. Q for quantity, S for supplied. Quantity supplied. The little t here is in a given moment of time, for a time period. So it's shorthand. The quantity supplied per unit of time, T. So the quantity supplied could be per week, per month, per year, per day, whatever. So that's the quantity supplied. And that depends on that F there. In mathematics is sometimes called function, but for us we call it depends on. So you can write down F equals depends on, just language. So if the quantity supplied per unit of time depends on PU, price per unit. Now I could have the price of other goods as well, PW or PX or whatever. I could have a whole list of prices that also influence the supply of this curve, this product, I should say. Y for income, and I'm reading down here as I go through. 2 is income, consumer incomes. In economics, we always say Y is income. It's a tradition. H for health and safety, number 3. That will influence the supply. F for fashion, marketing, advertising, all of that. So that will influence the amount supplied. Is the good a necessary good? N. The weather. If you're a farmer, the weather is bad, you don't produce as much. You can't supply as much. So W is important. And U. U is what we call a portmanteau term. It just picks up everything we've forgotten. Because invariably when you write something like this down, someone's going to say, but you've left out something. And we can say, no, we didn't. It's you. It just in case we've forgotten something. And you can see that is a very complicated expression. It's a lot in there. We don't want to carry around all of that with us, so we say the quantity supplied per unit of time, quantity supplied, S, per unit of time, P, depends on, that's the F, depends on the price per unit. and we ignore all of these: income, health and safety, fashion, necessary goods, the weather. We ignore it all. But if you ignore them, you have to say you're ignoring it. You can't just ignore it. You have to admit that you're ignoring it. And we do that in a little Latin expression, ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus means everything else being held constant. So everything else being held constant is ceteris paribus, and that's how we got from this one here down to this one here. We've held these constant. Now you can have a movement of the curve, a movement of the supply curve from S to S1. Well, this can happen by, if I go back for a moment, any of these change in here will cause this to shift position. If you change the price, you go along it. But if you change H or Y or F, any of these, income, health and fashion, necessary goods, the weather, if you change any of those, it'll cause a shift of the curve. So there we have a movement from S to S1 because of a shift of the curve. It may be caused by the fall in the price of inputs. For example, the price of bread may fall because the price of harvest wheat. So if wheat, there's a bumper crop on wheat, a lot of wheat's produced, the price of wheat will fall, the bakers have to pay less for it, the bakers will therefore try to compete amongst themselves, and they will cut the price of bread. So the price of bread will fall because the supply of bread has increased. And we'll move from one equilibrium to this lower equilibrium. The price has fallen and the quantity has increased. So for completeness of the topic, we want to make sure that you understand the movement along the supply curve versus a shift of the curve. So here's a movement along the curve that's caused by a change in price. So the quantity depends on price, ceteris paribus, everything else being constant. If that's the case, we move along the curve by changing the price. If we change any of the other conditions of supply, say income, health and safety, fashion, necessary goods, the weather, if we change any of those, we'll cause a shift of the curve. So a shift of the curve, upwards or downwards, is caused by these ones over here. If we hold all of those constant, we call it ceteris paribus. We're just saying the supply depends on the price. Everything else constant. We're ignoring everything else, ceteris paribus. So we're holding all of these constant. We could just change two if we wanted to. We could say the supply depends on the price and the income of the consumers. Again, ceteris paribus, we're holding some things constant, but we've extended it. And in that case, we can show a shift of the curve because of a change in income. So here's our original curve, and here's our change, the one caused by the change in income, Y. So I've just extended this one by 1 by Y here. I could put in 3 and put in H as well, and we'd have a shift of the curve as well. So we see here that at the price P1, the quantity is, let's say, with supply curve supply 1, it's Q1. After some health considerations or something of that nature, some report about the product, perhaps at the same price people want to buy less of it. They're worried about it. So the quantity is reduced. And that's it. That's all we're going to do in this one. Please go over the video several times because it is an important video. This introduces the market. We're going to add in eventually the demand curve and get the full market understanding. So this is part of the way there. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.